Hi everyone, today's video is very short. I'm just going to tell you how to become a maths expert by doing this one thing. And I'm going to give the spoiler away now. That one thing is repetition instead of understanding. So I was looking for some guidance on how to improve my maths revision, and I came across this article talking about becoming fluent in maths. And it's by this professor of engineering called Barbara Oakley. And she actually has a book, but when I was reading the article, I didn't realize this was the same person until she started talking about her story of how she became fluent in maths. But anyways, in this article, which I will link in the description, the author was talking about how there's a bit of a problem in Western countries of trying to make students understand maths and science. And when I say understand, and when the article talks about understanding, it's not saying that understanding a concept is a bad thing, but constantly focusing on understanding the concept can take away time from actually doing the problem. And there are so many different theorems and laws in maths and physics, for example, where a lot of the time we will feel like we understand concepts, but other times we will feel like something is foreign to us. But it doesn't mean that we should stick on that thing until we understand it before actually trying to practice the questions. So the article basically talks about how repetition is the most important thing when it comes to learning maths. And that is how you actually become fluent in maths. And even though a lot of people know repetition is important, most people don't do it because A, we know that it's hard and it doesn't feel nice when you keep answering questions and getting them wrong. But two, even for teachers, it takes more time to mark questions that have been done by students rather than explaining and understanding why a concept is a certain thing. The thing about repetition is that the more times you do it, the less times you have to repeat yourself of those steps of how to solve that problem. And Oakley uses an example of a golfer swinging the ball with their, is it called a bat or a racket, or I forgot what the thing's called that golfers use. But when you're first learning golf, there will be all these complex steps that you have to learn when it comes to your swing. But the more you do it, the less you will have to think about it and the more you will just do it. This is similar to how I feel right now as I am learning tennis. And there are so many different steps when it just comes to hitting the racket and hitting the ball using the swing of the racket. But eventually I want to get to that stage where I'm not thinking about how I'm twisting my arm or the way I'm holding the racket. I'm just hitting it and hoping that the ball will fly. So the purpose of repetition is to basically just get used to doing complex things without having to really think about it. And a lot of the time we think that we need to deeply understand something and read about all of these different things behind it to really be able to answer the question. But Oakley even said in the article, a lot of the time you will think that you understand something, but then when you try and answer the question, if you have an exam for it, you will realize that you actually don't really understand this. And you thought that you did because you might have read or written a lot about it without actually doing that thing. So before Oakley became an engineer, she was studying a language for a very long time, and she actually had that as part of her career when I think she was working in the army. But she basically utilized the skills that she gained from learning a new language and implemented that into her maths. And she talked about when learning a language, what most people do is that they're just trying to understand how to read or to write something. But to really become fluent in it, you really have to be able to put words, for example, into new sentences and to change the tenses and to understand when not to use something, and not understand by reading about all of these different things of these different tenses, but literally just practicing saying the words in different formats. And that is the same thing with maths, because you can read about one particular theorem a billion times, but until you implement that theorem into different types of questions under different topics and keep repeating that, you won't really understand how to answer that type of question. And there will be situations where that type of question will come up and you might only know it in a very specific, rigid format, just like how you could be learning a language and only know how to say particular words in a very rigid, specific format. But if you're speaking to a native speaker, you might not be able to say those words in that rigid format. As you know, you might have to say it fluently. And that is the difference between someone who is just trying to understand the words and really trying to become fluent in it. It's like with maths. Do you want to just be someone who knows how to answer a particular question on a particular topic when it comes up in that specific format? Or do you want to be able to understand it regardless of how the question comes up in? Do you really want to feel like you know that topic inside and out? Well, then that means you need to repeat and you need to memorize and you need to really just keep answering that type of question. So this is something I'm really trying to apply more and more to maths, because especially with A-levels, which is what I'm doing, you really have to be able to know when it's time to use a certain type of expertise, because it's not like other stages, for example, GCSE, where you're told, okay, this is the question about probability, this is the question about linear algebra, this is the question about, I don't know, another random topic like fractions or something. There will just be specific problems in A-level maths and further maths, and you're expected to know how to solve it. And that can only come from being fluent in the subject. Just like how if a native speaker speaks to you, if you are fluent, then you would just be able to respond regardless of how they use certain words to maybe, for example, ask you a question in their language. So in the article, Oakley refers to this process called chunking, and it was originally conceptualized by Herbert Simon, who was, I think, a psychologist, but some sort of researcher from memory who was analyzing chess players and realized that a lot of the successful players could store thousands of different chess moves, but he kind of referred to them as chunks of knowledge in their long-term memory, and that was how a lot of them were able to win the competitions and the matches. So they were able to recall tens of thousands of different chess patterns. And what Herbert has realized, or I guess Simon, sorry, is that in general, experts, even outside of chess, are able to react to different situations because they have that knowledge stored in their long-term memory in these sorts of chunks. So I looked at a few articles, and my understanding of chunks was that it's basically grouping together information, and the groups are called the chunks, and then they're stored in the long-term memory, and by chunking them it's easier to remember them as opposed to just trying to remember loads of different bits of information in your short-term memory. I feel like there isn't enough research on this, and I haven't been able to find enough research on chunking. So, I mean, the purpose of this video isn't to specifically talk about chunking, I'm just talking about repetition in general. But when it comes to trying to memorize these different things and trying to repeat different questions, a good way to think about it is to try and store these different bits of information, these different types of questions in your memory by remembering them in groups rather than as individuals. So that comes from repetition and memorization. So with maths, constantly doing questions again and again and again, even if you feel like you really understand it, you really need to go back and try and do questions as much as possible. There's this YouTube channel that I actually love watching called The Math Sorcerer, and this is a topic that he talks about quite often, repetition and just constantly doing maths and reminding yourself of how to do different maths problems. And he actually advises that people should try and do at least one maths problem a day to kind of keep up with their studying. And this is something that's actually quite useful, because even if you stop doing maths for one day, you can feel it the next time it's time to solve a problem. So repetition is very important to keep the maths and to become fluent within the maths. Just like how if you want to learn a language, the best way is to speak that language as much as possible. So that's it for this video. It was very short. I mean, the key point of it was just to say that repetition is extremely important in maths, much more than understanding. And in the article that I was referring to in this video, Barbara actually says that understanding doesn't build fluency. Instead, fluency builds understanding. True understanding of a complex subject comes only from fluency. So what she's trying to say is that the more you repeat questions and the more you solve maths problems, the more you will begin to understand it, because you're constantly doing those things rather than trying so hard to understand it before going to practice at all. Because when it comes to the exam, you're not going to be tested on how much you understand and remember the origins of Pythagoras' theorem. You're going to be tested on how to solve a question on trigonometry. So this is a really important aspect of maths, and if you are learning maths, I really suggest that you do this. Repetition is painful, but it's definitely needed, especially with maths, and I would say physics as well, but I'll talk about that in another video. So stop trying to understand and just practice. I'll try and follow that advice too. I know it can be hard, especially when you want to read about philosophers all day or try and understand all these intricacies of a maths problem, but just keep practicing and you will eventually understand it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.